Good morning to everyone who joined us today in Top 101 debate. I'm really happy to have us together with organizers, Prudentia and Nasdaq Riga. And in our cozy studio, we are together with Carlos Krastinch, managing partner of Prudentia.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And Lena Dubova, management board member of Nasdaq Riga. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, my name is Martin Zbichevskis, and shortly about myself, I'm serving as professional board member in various Latvian companies, and for instance, Delfin Group listed in Nasdaq. But I'm also mentor and investor in startup scene, and investment environment in Baltics will be our main topic today. After 2 years of pandemic, we all hoped that world economy will come back to on track, but 2022 year created totally different track. And after Russian invasion into Ukraine, politicians, investors, entrepreneurs changed their strategies, policies, and decisions significantly. And today, we would like to encourage discussion about opportunities and risks according to investors and entrepreneurs. Questions like how it looks from the eyes of foreign investors. Is there a difference between Baltics and other Eastern European countries? We will raise to our distinguished guests we have today. But before that, I would like to invite Lena for a couple introductory remarks. Please, Lena.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. It's really my pleasure to be here today and welcome you to this discussion. Nasdaq and Prudentia has been compiling a list of most valuable companies called Top 101 since 2005. And the list itself is a very good way how to gain the comprehensive insight into the companies and businesses operating in our region. It also gives an opportunity to compare the companies and follow how companies are growing and how they overcome different crises. Nowadays, when seemingly all businesses all around the world are facing a lot of challenges, it is important to seek and find new ways how to do the business, how operate, how to continue to grow and develop. And here, good corporate governance plays essential role. It helps to strengthen companies' resilience. It helps to retain investors and financial institutions' trust. Good corporate governance helps company to grow. Today, in our discussion, we will hear a lot about risk management, about strategy shifts, about internal controls, perhaps also sustainability and compliance. All these are corporate governance aspects, and they are as essential as never before. So I welcome you once more to this very timely and very topical discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. And now let me shortly go through content of this webinar. We have 3 keynotes, and we will start with retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges of United States Army, and his keynote will be about current geopolitical environment and how Article 5 works in practical terms for the region. General Hodges' speech will be followed by Mr. Jim Turnbull presentation. Mr. Turnbull represents EBRD, and he will give his views about investment environment and how international financial institutions could support this region. And finally, we will hear from Nerijus Mačiulis from Swedbank. Nerijus is a well-known speaker in financial markets in our region, so he will cover current developments in Baltic economics. Second part, we will have very senior panel, and there we will have gentlemen who have their skin in the game in this region. Investors and entrepreneurs from Poland, Piotr Nocen, Ivras Abramovicius, former politician and right now investor in Ukraine and Baltics. And finally, but certainly not lastly, Mr. Martin Gauss, well-known CEO of biggest airline company, Air Baltic. So we also encourage you to submit questions. There are two options. Those who are joined via Zoom, please use chat. And those who use live stream in Delphi, please submit your questions via email prudentia@prudentia.lv. So I guess we are ready to go into the content, and I'm really honored to welcome former retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, General of United States Army, former commander of United States Army in Europe, and today Mr. Hodges is serving and advising the Center of European Policy Analysis, based in Washington, D.C. think tank, focusing on transatlantic relationships. Welcome, General.
Thank you very much for the privilege. Good to be with you.
Yes, I guess NATO and Article 5, statement that Baltics have never been so safe, is very, very challenging for not just investors, but also for whole societies in this region. Have you seen this? You have commented plenty of hours to different audiences in last couple months of period about current geopolitical developments. Have you seen right now?
So right now, of course, we are in a very difficult time for Ukrainian forces. But as I have been watching this for the last 3.5 months now, if you can step back from the day-to-day fighting, one can see and realize that actually the Russians are on their last legs. They do not have the ability to escalate or launch another offensive beyond what they are doing right now, other than to use nuclear weapon. I mean, there's nothing left. They are pulling very old equipment out of storage that has not been maintained. They are sending soldiers that are untrained into this fight, and they're using everything that they have just to try to capture Severodonetsk. So that tells you something about the lack of additional capacity that the Russians have. Clearly, they have apparently endless amounts of artillery ammunition, but this is the only thing that they can do, is just in a almost medieval way continue to grind away on Ukrainian defenders. This is not going to last. My sense is that the Ukrainians are going to suffer for these next few weeks, but that the full weight of what the West is providing, the artillery, the rocket launchers, only about 1/4 of what has been committed is actually in their hands right now. So in the coming weeks, we're going to finally feel the weight of all of the aid coming from the US, UK, Poland, Baltic allies, Germany and Netherlands. This is in Norway, is going to really start arriving in the next few weeks. Of course, this is too late. It should have happened 2 months ago, but we are where we are. And so I remain optimistic about the long term, that the tide is really going to change because of the damage that has been done to Russian forces through their own poor performance and poor planning, and because of the incredible defensive effort of Ukrainian forces.
General, of course, current situation is more or less clear from military perspective. But if we would like to look to this from regional geopolitical perspective and maybe look ahead for some months, and Have you seen the situation that those countries in NATO who are on the border with Russia, should they feel themselves different as they used to, or is there change in situation?
So what I see actually is in the long run good news for Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland for a couple of reasons. First, what we have seen from Russian Federation forces, they are grinding themselves into dust against Ukraine. So there's not a whole other large element of Russian forces that could attack any of our allies in the very near future. They just don't have it, the capability to do that. So that's one part that's encouraging for me. Secondly, one of the outcomes of Russia's attack on Ukraine is that our great alliance has realized that we have got to have more capability stationed actually in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. So you're going to see, I think, in the coming year, an increase of NATO forces that are actually in those countries. So a significant uplift of US, German, British, French, and other allies in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. I think you're going to see what we call permanent basing. This will be a change because clearly Russia has abrogated the NATO-Russia Founding Act, which is why we did not have permanent basing in former Soviet republics or former Warsaw Pact countries. That's going to change, I believe, in the coming year. And so these all will represent not only increased security, but also a requirement for construction, continued effort to improve transportation networks in the region, storage of ammunition, storage of fuel. These are all going to be required. The third thing is Sweden and Finland joining the alliance. First of all, that is going to happen. There's no doubt this is going to happen. Turkey has interjected themselves in this process, as is their prerogative, and it's not very helpful right now. But I feel confident that this is going to be resolved. The burden is on the United States to work with Turkey to resolve this. I feel very confident it's going to be resolved, not as fast as we had originally hoped. But the point is, adding Finland and Sweden to NATO is going to dramatically change in a very positive way security for Baltic countries, security in the Baltic Sea. I mean, there's so many positive things that are going to come out of this. And I think that, so even though if you only watch day to day what's happening in Ukraine, it can be frustrating. The long term, it's going to be a major plus. And I just read where the Deputy Secretary of Defense of the United States said that we are going to arm Ukraine for years to come. So this is a long-term investment in Ukraine and in the greater Black Sea region, which I think also will contribute to improved stability and security along all of NATO's eastern front.
General, on the one hand, there is what we can do in our side as allies, like strengthen our armies, build our capacity. As you said, Nordic countries also are joining, and it will create like good environment across the whole Baltic Sea. But on the other hand, the big part of this story are sanctions on Russia right now. How do you see, Deltmont? Are there some further processes what we should take into account regarding those sanctions? Should they be stronger? Would they harm, and will be this burden only for Russia, or do you see spillover effects to our region? What do you think about this?
So one area where sanctions have already been very beneficial is in the area of specific components that the Russians need to build the precision munitions. They can no longer make the precise targeted munitions that they have relied on because certain minor components have to be imported from other countries. So they have used up more than 50% of their precision munition stockpile. They can't replace that. So this is very important. They still have plenty of what we call dumb bombs and conventional artillery ammunition, but the precision munitions that would be needed to strike specific targets deeper inside Ukraine, they can't replace that. So to me, this is one of the best examples of where sanctions have been helpful. On the broader idea of sanctions, and I suspect there are others on this call that will be more expert than me, but certainly there's been an effort to embargo oil, to attempt to slow down or stop Russia's export of oil. But my sense is that this is going to be a very, very difficult task, and it seems that oil manages to leak through whatever the sanctions are. We have enough experience of this, and so maybe the sanctions should be more about how do you reduce the revenues that Russia gets from its oil exports versus reducing the amount of oil that is exported. And I think some form of tariffs, for example, if all of the EU nations put a massive tariff on the oil, and then that was then used to help pay for Ukrainian reconstruction, for example, something like that, to go after the revenue, not the amount, because clearly it's going to be difficult for all of us. I live in Frankfurt, Germany, so my German friends kind of laugh when I tell them that Americans are concerned about paying $5 per gallon, because most Europeans already pay more than that. But nonetheless, that will have domestic implications in the U.S. Already. So if we can figure out a way to reduce Russia's revenues without necessarily reducing the export, I think that might be a better way to approach this. I believe in sanctions because most of our allies are reluctant to take more physical or tangible steps if we haven't also tried to use economic power as a part of this. If you'll allow me one final point. When you mentioned something earlier, which I think is very important, that our Baltic allies are also doing their share. And nobody has done more than Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland at self-defense and also in host nation support. But we have got to fix the transportation network that connects Poland to our Baltic allies. And Rail Baltica is years behind on being completed. And getting this rail network on European gauge completed all the way up to the northernmost part of Estonia is an important part of defense and deterrence as well. And I hope that this will be completed soon. Thanks.
Thank you, General. I could not agree more about Rail Baltic, and I hope that this joint infrastructure will create a new mindset for our region. But maybe just final question from my side. You served in various regions, Europe, United States, and even Afghanistan, and so my question would be, how you see right now, should we change some mindset in our region when we acknowledge that Russia definitely never will be different a neighbor as so aggressive neighbors? So do you have any ideas about this?
Well, great question, and thanks for giving me a chance to comment on that. First of all, our allies that live along NATO's eastern front have always warned us about the threat that comes from Russia. That you know Russia, you know Russians better than us, and so we have been the collective we, U.S., Canada, France, Germany, Netherlands, Italy. We have been naive, I think, in hoping that somehow we could always talk with the Kremlin and figure things out. But there's zero historical evidence that they would respond to that. So three things I think that have to change. First of all, of course, we're going to continue to deal with Moscow. a massive country with endless amounts of resources. We need to be able to do things with them, but we have to have our eyes wide open, and any agreement will be worthless if there is not total transparency and very strong compliance mechanisms that everybody, including Germany and France, have to enforce. That's number one. Number two, we see now that the Russians have absolutely no problem with killing innocent people, using precision munitions to hit apartments, hospitals, theaters, schools. These are not accidents. This was deliberate targeting. And then what we've seen that they did in Mariupol and now in Severodonetsk and Kharkiv. So what does that mean? That means we have got to significantly increase and improve our air and missile defense. We do not have enough air and missile defense capabilities, regardless of what type. Ground-based systems, sensors, air-based systems. There is not enough air and missile defense. And of course, it can't be that everybody has to buy their own NASAMS or Patriot or THAAD or whatever system is chosen. This is an area where the alliance is going to have to improve, because we realize it's not just about protecting transportation infrastructure. We now realize you actually have to protect populated areas as well. So a dramatic increase in requirement for air and missile defense. And the third thing is related to logistics. The amount of ammunition that has been consumed in the last 3 months far exceeds what we used in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. So the industrial base of the United States and all of our allies right now is not operating at a level to generate enough ammunition to fight what we're seeing in Ukraine. And so I think there's a growing recognition by allies that we are going to have to pay to produce more ammunition, conventional as well as precision munitions, and put them into storage, into depots, as a part of deterrence. We see what the requirement is. So I would anticipate significant increases in production requirements for all types of ammunition, artillery, rockets, anti-ship, and missile defense.
Thank you, General. Would you call this new geopolitical environment or just adjustment?
Maybe a reawakening of the fact that there are bad people out there that are willing to use force and do not care for international law if they see that we are not willing to enforce it. And of course, the Chinese are watching this. If the Chinese see that all of us together cannot stop Russia from what it's doing in Ukraine, and that we are overly concerned about the potential use of a nuclear weapon, that we don't take the steps that need to be taken, I think that sends a signal to China, North Korea, Iran, even Pakistan. And so this is about much more than just Ukraine.
Yes, it seems like old saying that we should prepare for war and then we will be in peace. It's
exactly
in the right time. So thank you very much, General. I would encourage you to stay with us, and maybe there will raise some questions. But now I think we could move forward with our next speaker. And I'm happy to invite Mr. Jim Turnbull. And topic what Jim will cover will be about are there any differences in terms of geopolitics and potential support from EBRD and investment environment in our region. And Jim is Deputy Director of Capital and Financial Markets Development Department at the EBRD. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, even though it's really quite early in the morning here in London.
Yes. So
okay.
Jim will have a presentation, and I'm happy that he has opportunity to start with short story, and later we will jump into discussion. Please, Jim.
Yes, thank you. I'll try and be fairly quick with this, right? Is the screen up and running? I can't see it on my my computer right at the moment. But
yes, audience already see your presentation.
Okay, well that's good. I can't see it myself. I don't actually know why. But I think we can make a fairly clear statement, and it was great to hear from Lieutenant General Hodges, right? But as everybody is aware, EBRD is very active in this region. And to be perfectly honest, we were very active back in the day in Russia also, trying to reconstruct the economy after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We make an unequivocal statement in the bank, right, that even in the changed geopolitical conditions, EBRD supports Ukraine and the region. And this is very important. And the region includes all Baltic states. Just to make very clear also, we don't lend in Scandinavia or we don't invest in Scandinavia because they are what we call a lending member of EBRD. They're not a borrowing member of EBRD. So our engagement extends to markets in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet republics, some markets in North Africa, and obviously the Baltic states, which is very, very close to my heart and very, very important to the overall engagement. We've put together a resilience and livelihoods framework. It's called to support Ukraine and other countries during the war. There's emergency liquidity facilities for companies virtually everywhere to support electricity transmission and various other initiatives. That support package applies to neighbouring countries and would apply, obviously, in the case of the Baltic states. Now, in terms of market fundamentals, right, it doesn't take a genius, right, to work out that market conditions are difficult at the moment. That's not really a surprise. We've got geopolitical instability, but we've also got rising inflation, which, even though the war's being blamed, that was actually happening before. It's just that the war has exacerbated the problem. So market liquidity is disappearing, and things are very, very difficult to place at the moment. Risk is up, risk monitoring is up, and long-term investors are, while they're still investing in the market, they're investing a lot more cautiously. Okay, so that looks like a little bit of bad news, right, for what we're trying to do in the Baltic states to help develop capital markets. But the reality is it's a little bit more nuanced than that. The thing that we have to recognise, and EBRD does recognise, is that the Baltics is a key player in the reconstruction process. It's key to our name. We're the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And we realise that the needs for Ukraine in the reconstruction period, not just the war period, are going to be huge. So while we're engaging in specific transactions in the Ukraine to ensure that crops get sown and various other initiatives, right, where the big work for EBRD will be, in my opinion, will be during the reconstruction process. So it's crucial for us to actually have the support of the European capital markets. And as you're aware, we've been very, very active in the Baltic states in helping the Baltic states develop their capital markets, because we see this as a huge conduit ultimately for the Ukraine. And I would believe that with the addition of donor money to support new transaction types, there's no reason to assume that that the Baltic states can't act as a very, very strong conduit between the markets of the EU and the US and through to the Ukraine. The reality is, right, that in a reconstruction process, the legal and regulatory environment is going to lag in the Ukraine. And so we need a strong legal and regulatory environment, which of course exists in the Baltic states. So that's part of the background of what we really should be looking at in this type of environment. You can see that we've been developing and trying to support the development of product in the Baltic states, because many years ago we found that the Baltic states had lots of money, but they were putting it into Europe and not into their neighbouring countries. So we've been trying to help develop capital market instruments. Ukraine has now changed that dynamic, because we're looking at a lot of these capital market instruments that we're supporting as being helpful also to some of the negatives that have arisen from the Ukraine war. For instance, we've been supporting with the central banks in the Baltics a commercial paper program, which is a short-term funding instrument. Now, it was the support of this was actually fairly lukewarm, I would have said, before the Ukraine crisis. But now quite a lot of people are seeing that this product is going to be extremely useful for funding short-term purchases of things like LNG and all of these types of instruments that we're going to need if we're going to reduce our reliance on Russian oil. And I think that that's really quite important. We have to remember. The other thing that we have to remember with EBRD is that we're capital market supportive. We've been very involved in all of the countries in the Baltic states in trying to create a broader capital market. And with that in mind, we've always supported issuance. Traditionally, we're a keynote investor and a keystone investor, and we probably would look at 20% of an issue. In difficult market conditions, we'll look at more. But the beauty of EBRD, and the bit that I really like about EBRD, my bankers don't like it, but I really like it, is that in the event of public or private sector support for particular instruments, EBRD will scale down its investment to allow the private sector to come in and support the market. Additionally, EBRD believes with the reconstruction that we're not going to be reconstructed in the same way. We have to recognise that green and sustainable issues are still going to be a big part of what we look at. That actually plays into supporting the market because the most resilient sector of the financial or the corporate financial markets at the moment are the green bonds and SLBs. Now, SLBs are a relatively new product, but we're supporting those. They're called sustainability-linked bonds. We're in favour of those because they make corporations look seriously at their organisational behaviour. Whereas a green bond, you can actually be a brown polluter and issue a green bond for a green project. But with an SLB, you have to commit to meaningful changes in your behaviour in terms of your CO2 output, etc. So we believe that they're valuable instruments for this area. Lastly, I think it's well known that we've done a lot of policy dialogue in the Baltic states. We consider this now to be reprioritised as increasingly important. So you will continue to see me and my team in that country, in the region, on a fairly regular basis, greening the financial systems, etc. The other thing that we've got to remember is, despite the support of EBRD and donors and other people globally, we have to face facts. Rates are rising. Conditions are going to be tough. This environment we're supportive to this environment, but we have to realise that inflationary pressures are strong and they're not going to go away. So we suspect that the level of interest rates is obviously going to rise quite gradually. Now, I'll stop there. I went through it very, very quickly just to give you an overview of what we are looking at. We're looking at all sorts of broad product expansion. Also, real estate investment trusts could potentially have a role to play in Ukraine reconstruction, but that is further down the road. At the same time, we'll also do the legal and regulatory reform work in the Ukraine once we've got confidence that we can actually implement those changes. So that's a helicopter view of what we're looking at. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jim. That was a very clear statement about main priorities, what you see from London. But you have very long experience in this region as leader of technical expertise, which was done in Baltics, and maybe you could look a bit more into this inflation challenge, because that was challenge a couple of decades ago for our region, and now it's more global challenge. And do you see there specific risks which we should tackle, or this right now it's totally different?
Well, I looked at the inflationary pressures, and I'm probably in a better position than a large number of people because I was also in Asia during the financial crisis, and these types of instability only add to uncertainty and also inflation. People will tend to go short. They tend to stockpile also, which is something that adds to the problem of inflation. we cannot brush it away. Right, it is here, and all the influences are going to be adding to, all the negative geopolitical influences are going to be adding to the problem. I think the situation is, right, that in some ways we're going to have to raise interest rates globally. I think we have to accept that. As to what the speed of that is going to be, I'm not entirely sure, but it probably, it's probably going to be relatively quick in some economies, right, particularly those that are operating at full capacity. And there's very little, that we can actually constructively do about it in the short run, because when we look at it, all the pressures are there. We've got the war, we've got supply chain disturbances, we've got the ramifications in the UK of Brexit, right, which can't be understated. Migration, right, has reduced, right, which means that we don't have employment capacity which can be moved from one area to another. So there is a lot of bad news out there, and one thing that I'm really grateful about is that I'm not a central banker at the moment.
Yes, I bet you are. Jim, maybe we could switch to the sector and industry-wise. Of course, energy sector and sustainability goals, those are focuses which were already for decades for EBRD important. But in the same time, maybe this particular situation and a new geopolitical environment, do you see need to change some priorities from government policy perspective, or you see also in your side that there are different priorities at the moment?
Well, one priority which has jumped out in the last little while, right, is that the energy security issue leads to a issue of food security. Right, and this is an area that worries us, not just about the area that the Baltics, right, but also about the countries, in particular North Africa, that are reliant on Ukraine wheat and produce, because Ukraine is an agricultural powerhouse and has been for generations. So we are looking at them more constructively in terms of the supply chain issues, variously across the board with a lot of transactions. We're trying to clear impediments, right, for the movement of these types of grains and agricultural commodities. As we recognise, right, there is a problem in the Ukraine at the moment because a lot of the grain, even if it's a successful harvest, we're going to find it quite difficult to get out. And that's a big issue that we need to look at. So yes, we are gradually shifting, but it is the same sort of focus. And it's mutually reinforcing at the moment, if we think about it. If we can come up with constructive energy security reforms, it reduces the reliance on Russian oil. Let's just make it as clear as that. One of the ways to weaken any oil-producing economy, including my own, Australia, is to do more in the area of renewables, and also we also have to face the fact that we're going to have to compensate a little bit, right, with probably the cleanest form of fossil fuels, which is LNG. But these types of issues are things that we're really going to have to address as and when we're moving. It's a tremendously difficult thing to talk about reconstruction at this point when there's still a war on. But we need to be prepared, and a lot of the things that we need to do now. Otherwise, we're going to be completely ineffective, right, when the reconstruction process begins.
Jim, those challenges are very clear, but do you see any difference between Baltic region and other Central Eastern European countries, or more or less you see that this is regional assessment?
Okay, well, the Baltic countries are more, in my view, they're more developed. They're more agile than a lot of the countries in Eastern Europe. We only lend to our countries of operation, so the Baltic states are obviously included in the Eastern European part of it. But I've always viewed them as probably a slightly more innovative region, and also a region that prides itself on its self-reliance, I think, which is one of the things that I see as one of the true positives. Your region is in many ways, it's a bit of a powerhouse in Europe for things like fintech and new technology. The very interesting sort of very, very large unicorns have originated from the region. It's pretty impressive in terms of innovation. So I personally view it as a slightly different area than the rest of Eastern Europe. Because it's also in the Eurozone, we've done a lot of advocacy recently with investor units such as MSCI and FTSE Russell to try and get the Baltic states classified as a single region. The reason that we want to do that is that will encourage a huge amount of inflow from passive investors. If it's seen as a single region, it's bigger in terms of its index allocation, and it will benefit from inflows. We also see the Baltic states obviously as a conduit for actions potentially when we're reconstructing the Ukraine. So the quick answer is, yeah, we kind of look at it as Eastern Europe, but we look at it as a special case within the Eastern Europe context.
Thank you, Jim. So I guess many entrepreneurs in Baltic countries should feel proud about this comparison. Maybe we could finalize our discussion about how you see from policymaker perspective, financial markets, financial sector acknowledge need for significant reforms in the last decade. And do you see that there is still need for significant change, or more or less you see that financial sector is ready to be a good partner for international financial institutions to support further growth and investment in those infrastructure sectors?
Look, at the risk of being accused of having a job for life, capital market reform never stops. And it goes on, right? Even in the case of very, very successful countries such as my own, Australia, it doesn't stop. It changes tack. Right? I'm really impressed by what's happened in the Baltic states over the last 5 or 6 years. The support of the EC has been a big part of that, right? But so has been the constructive policy of regulators in that area. Regulators and also market participants, to be perfectly honest, right? So our support will continue for capital market development. The indicator is in the name of the department I work for, which is Capital Market Development Department. We will continue to support any further movements to try and future develop the market. A lot of it in the Baltic states is down to publicity too. You've done a very good job in the fintech system and in that particular area, but it's not really currently seen as a capital market destination. But it's changing, and I'm pleased to be a part of that.
Jim, thank you very much for your insights and views. Please stay with us, but we will move forward. And now I'm happy to invite Nerijus Mačiulis, Deputy Group Chief Economist at Swedbank. And Nerijus will give us... Good morning, Nerijus. Good to see you. And we know that you prepared, as always, very interesting presentation about current developments of economic in Baltic countries. So feel free to start. The floor is yours. Over to you. Nerijus, we don't hear you.
Yes, sorry.
Yes,
I understand that...
Now we hear.
Yes. Somebody from your end will show my slides, hopefully in a minute. I have a few slides to illustrate the most recent economic developments. How do we see growth in the context of the war in Ukraine? What is likely to change going forward? And maybe a couple of slides on what we can expect in a longer term, what will drive the future growth in Baltic countries. So if you could go forward with my slides, please.
Yes.
Okay. as you can see that obviously I have to start that we live in I'm not even sure what is the right word to describe the current environment. Interesting would be to put it mildly, but we live in a very unusual and dramatic environment. And this has been the case since the very start of this decade. They started with something which was very hard to predict, the pandemic, and then it evolved. Now we have an unexpected war in Ukraine, and all of this, of course, has broad and long-lasting consequences. Baltic countries have managed to survive the pandemic with relatively mild economic consequences. As you can see, GDP growth was barely affected in 2020. It was a milder, short-lived recession, followed by a very strong rebound in 2021. And this year, of course, we cut our GDP growth forecasts dramatically for all three Baltic countries, mainly due to the war in Ukraine and related energy crisis in Europe, and in general commodity price spikes which affect inflation in our home markets. Now already since the beginning of this year we have seen the economic sentiment has been declining, not universally across all sectors. Households have been affected the most. They are of course afraid of the war, of the developments in Ukraine, and are also uncertain and unhappy about their personal finances because of the inflation. But many business sectors, especially exporting sectors, if you could go on to the next slide, you can see that manufacturing is still, you can say, booming, very steady growth despite all of the negative external shocks. Export orders remain close to the record highs and barely budged during the recent months, and this is still related to unprecedented strong global demand. And I'm not sure how aware you are about the general economic consequences globally from the pandemic, but one clear consequence was restriction of supply, which is still an ongoing issue in China because China applies the zero COVID policy, and whenever it has a rising number of COVID cases, it closes down, imposes rather strict quarantine measures, closes down manufacturing companies, ports, restricts movements of trucks and so on. All this restricts supply of goods to the rest of the world. And another consequence of the pandemic was the fact that people all around the world, mainly in Western countries, have a lot of money. Demand is booming. Wherever you look, US, Euro area, the problem is not insufficient demand, but insufficient supply. Shortage of employees, shortage of commodities, shortage of semiconductors, shortage of trucks, truck drivers, shortage of container ships. Wherever you look, especially in 2021, we saw a very, I call the situation a good life crisis. You don't see this very often when demand is so much in excess of supply. And of course, then the major consequence of that, this was not unexpected to us. The major consequence was inflation. If you have more money slushing around, if you have more buyers, then there are suppliers that can produce these goods, that can provide these services. If you move on to the next slide, then you'll see that the consequence of that was a massive inflation, and not only in Baltic countries. Of course, in Baltic countries it is at 20 or close to 20%. I think in all three Baltic countries we'll see inflation soon at 20%. And but if you look at US or Euro area as a whole, then inflation is at the 40-year-old highs. So it's here it is a bit more pronounced, but one of the biggest drivers here is, of course, also rapidly increasing wages, rapidly increasing labor costs. But this is not unique problem that we have. And yes, one of the inflationary factors is related to war in Ukraine and energy crisis in Europe. We do not have enough natural gas. Oil prices are roughly 100% more expensive and higher than they were a year ago. And most of the commodities are also much more expensive than they were on average during the past 10 years. Transportation costs from China are still close to record highs, although easing somewhat. So all of this has translated into a very large inflation. But make no mistake, I'm puzzled when I see the discussions across Europe, when I see these discussions in Baltic countries, that we need to help consumers, that we need to cut taxes, that we need to provide additional boon and income for households. This makes no economic sense. It is popular, of course, for politicians to propose this, but the economic reality is that big part of this inflation is because people have a lot of money and they spend the money. So we need, of course, to look at the margins where people perhaps are in poverty, perhaps minimum monthly wage is insufficient, perhaps we need to increase the non-taxable income threshold. But to talk about the broad measures on supporting consumption, this just leads to even higher entrenched inflation. So that is why I'm a bit skeptical. And as you know, central banks are rushing ahead of each other who will raise interest rates faster and more now, because the slow coming realization that we have overheating economies in many places around the world, especially in United States, to some extent in Baltic countries. I will talk about this a little bit as well. But in this environment, you need stricter fiscal policy, you need stricter monetary policy, not additional stimulus. And this is, of course, very unpopular thing to say, and politicians are moving in the opposite direction. We see a collapse in consumer confidence to a lesser extent in Lithuania. We have been remarkably and strangely resilient. I don't have a very good explanation. Confidence has fallen in Latvia and Estonia to a lower level than at the beginning of the pandemic. That's also the case in the United States, in some European countries. People are afraid about their personal finances. To a large extent, this is related to unprecedented inflation. So if at the beginning of the pandemic, I mean, the shock was severe, but it was very short-lived, it is likely now that households are realizing that we have two ways forward. It's either unbearable inflation or recession. I personally believe that there are not many ways to stop inflation, and without a recession, you will not bring down inflation below 2%. And I think Fed realizes that, and Fed has come to terms to the fact that they will have to cause a recession in United States. So for us, the Goldilocks scenario would be that recession starts in United States, then ECB doesn't have to raise interest rates as much as expected now. And through the recession in the United States, then we see lower prices of the commodities, lower global demand for goods and services, which leads to naturally lower imported inflation and cools down the economy. So that's the best case scenario that I can imagine. I can imagine a lot worse scenarios where central banks can have to push interest rates even higher, even in a very inflationary environment. Stagflation is something that we are very likely to see in the second half of this year. And this environment is very different from what we have seen since the global financial crisis. This is where central banks have a lot less power to be lenders of last resort and helpers of the last resort. Whatever crisis we had in the past, be it the pandemic or China slowdown or any other problems during the last decade, central banks came in and saved the day by cutting interest rates and increasing money supply. They cannot do that now because their major first priority is to fight inflation. So they actually, I think, realized, as Jim said, that he is happy that he's not a central banker, and I perfectly agree with him. I mean, it's a terrible job to have now. They realized that they have to cause a recession and to rebuild the credibility after this pandemic environment. Okay, next slide, please. And confidence in Lithuania and to some extent in Baltic countries, other Baltic countries, was held up by still strong labor market. We saw a rapid recovery after the pandemic. Employment has increased to close to record high levels, with an exception of Latvia, where recovery was weaker, but still it was taking place. And at the same time, I should say now that we have not a problem of unemployment, but if you go to the next slide, you will see that the biggest problem is labor shortages. And even with the start of the war in Ukraine, we see that many sectors across Baltic countries say that one of the major factors that is stopping their growth and is an obstacle for their expansion is not shortage of demand, not shortage of finance, but shortage of employees. And this is partly the consequence of the pandemic. As I said, demand for goods is booming globally. Now services sectors are opening up. We also see recovering tourism sector, recovering accommodation, catering sectors. You need employees there as well. Labor shortages are very pronounced. They have come down a little bit since spring, but still remain close to record high levels. And wage growth decelerated in Latvia, but still remains very strong especially in Lithuania, but also in Estonia. And this is part of the problem because unit labor costs are increasing, wages are growing by 14% in the first quarter of this year in Lithuania. If you look only at the private sector, 16.5%. Part of this growth is related to very rapid increase in minimum monthly wage. And now, of course, all countries will face this dilemma, what to do with the rapid inflation, how to save and help the low earners. And it is likely that as of January 1st next year, minimum monthly wage will increase again in many countries. We know that Germany will increase it by almost 20%. But we also have to realize that it is probably needed to help those who earn the least, but it is at the same also inflationary factor. If you move on to the next slide now, then you'll see that despite the drop in confidence and despite the very high inflation, we did not see a collapse in consumer spending. And this is not a retail trade figures. This is Swedbank card data, which we follow on a weekly basis so that we know what is happening. As you know, retail trade data is very lagging. So you can see that this is still growing expenditure. Of course, this is nominal expenditure. So if you subtract the 20% inflation, we see a more moderate growth in household expenditure, a real growth probably a bit below 5%. So of course, with this kind of inflation, wages are not catching up, and real household consumption is probably going to be flat during the second half of this year, or even contract somewhat. Also, if you consider the fact that the interest rates are already increasing, 6-month Euribor is already positive, 3-month Euribor is going to be positive in a couple of months. So this is also going to weigh on those households who have housing mortgages and so on. So we have a lot of factors that will drag down consumption going forward. And this is the reason why I think that the first half of this year was exceptionally and unexpected strong. You don't see many signs of recession or slowdown of economic growth around the Baltic countries. But I think it's highly unlikely that this will continue in the second half of this year. There are many, many factors stacked against us. And as I said, stagflation is probably a very likely scenario. And on the next slide, you can see that where do the people are spending money now? We are also following the composition of the expenditure, and probably the exceptionalism of this year is that regardless of inflation, regardless of recession fears, regardless of falling consumer confidence, we see households are willing to travel again, and expenditure on airlines, airports, hotels, and abroad is much higher than it was in 2019. So after 2 years of very restricted possibilities to travel and take holidays, people are moving back again into services, into spending money on experiences, not goods. But on the next slide, you can also see that the expenditure of on different home activities, home building, furniture, gardening, electronics, they're not declining yet. And this was, as you know, the global shift in consumption composition, where during the pandemic, people could spend less money in restaurants, on holidays, in sports clubs, theaters, concerts, and so on. So what they did, they spent more time at home. They bought a new furniture, new electronic equipments, new stuff that they could use at home. So there was a very tangible, large shift in the household composition, movement from services into goods. And now this year we are moving backwards. So this is one of the reasons why it is likely that we will see a weaker consumption in goods, but consumption in services, at least for now, looks very strong, and households are not holding back in that area. Next slide, please. And another consequence of the pandemic globally, but also very visible in Baltic countries, deposits, very sizable deposits, especially household deposits. They are well above the long-term exponential trend, roughly increased by 30% since the start of the pandemic. Similar with the companies and corporate sector. And so far, we see that these reserves remain sizable. They are not shrinking yet. They are likely to be used as a buffer if we continue seeing external shocks, either from the energy sector or from interest rate environment or financial markets. But in that respect, Baltic households and corporates are very well prepared. We have not used the last decade to increase the leverage. We have not binged on low, zero, negative interest rates, unlike in the US. We have accumulated a lot of savings, while household debt remained one of the lowest in European Union. If you go to the next slide, you will see that household debt to income in Latvia and Lithuania is exceptionally low, just about 30% of annual income, a bit higher in Estonia, but still lower than Euro area average. Next slide, please. Now, interesting. Of course, I have to discuss if this business cycle has been sustainable or not. Have we seen any signs of the overheating economies? As I said, we see that in United States, the economy has been overheating, partially due to their very loose monetary policy. That's not the case in Baltic countries, although inflation would indicate that our economy is overheating and wage growth is growing much faster than productivity. So this is a problem. But if you look at if you compare this to the 2007 and 2009 experience, then this time is different. And back then we had a very massive credit impulse. Private sector debt as a share of GDP was increasing very rapidly. In other words, lending was growing much more rapidly than nominal GDP or income. And now, for the past decade, households, and especially corporates, have been deleveraging, and there was no positive credit impulse. So borrowed money was not overheating the economy. And this is visible as a consequence. We don't have trade deficits or current account deficits, which were massive in a period of 2007, 2008. 15 to 20% of GDP. This was remarkable imbalance, which illustrated that we were consuming a lot more than we should have been. We were borrowing from the future unsustainably. Now this is not the case. Current account is in balance. So this illustrates that we are not very vulnerable to external shocks, and we do not need to cut down our consumption and imports of products and services produced outside of our countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the housing market also, of course, is a bit of a cause for concern, because we've seen a massive increase in real estate prices, especially in Estonia and Lithuania, roughly 30% since the start of the pandemic. This was very unexpected. And I remember we discussed with our colleagues at the start of the pandemic. They were asking me, you know, how do we model this environment? Do we expect the real estate prices to drop by 20% or 30%? And I had a hard time convincing that why would the real estate prices drop in this environment? And this proved to be the case, that people became even more eager to buy bigger, newer apartments in different place apartments. There was no shock to real estate market. Part of that is, of course, very low interest rate environment, excess reserves, excess income, which was invested in real estate. So far, housing affordability did not fall because wages have been growing almost as rapidly as apartment prices. But going forward, we will see a bit more problems, probably given the fact that interest rates are increasing now much more rapidly. So affordability is going to fall, and we are likely to see weaker activity in the real estate market. Next slide, please. This is the economy heat index, which we calculate. We summarize all of the sustainability economic indicators, such as inflation, wage productivity gap, real estate prices, current account balances, imbalances, labor market situation, to measure if the economy is overheating and is vulnerable to external shock, or it's not. So this time around, you can see that the temperature of the economy is rising, but of course we are not, as I have illustrated with some of the slides, we are not in a as bad situation as we were in 2007. So I'll probably, I think my time is running out, so I'll probably finish with this slide, and if you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
Thank you, Nerijus. As always, so colorful in describing the numbers and trends related to so complex issue as economics. We have actually received one question, which I guess would be good if you could try to add some comments. Mostly, in my mind, you answered, but still. Given the current geopolitical situation and the scale of challenges the economies are facing, inflation, food supply, energy crisis, increase of interest rates, future pandemics, etc., is there a chance that the snake eating its own tail will eat it faster than it's actually capable to regrow? The question is, could we face much more severe and complex crisis than the one back in 2008? And if yes, how to address this issue in order to avoid it? Thank you. That was the first question which we would like to raise from audience. Nerijus.
No, I can quite confidently say that the answer is no. And I try to illustrate that with my slides, that we don't have a current account deficit. Our foreign trade is balanced, unlike during that unfavorable overheating period of 2006 and 2008. Now, there are some problems on the margin. You can say that real estate is expensive in some places, but even if the housing prices are now higher than they were in 2007, I mean, wages have doubled in that period. So as I illustrated also, affordability is still high. And we have actually just made a sensitivity analysis. We calculated that there would be some tensions and macroeconomic problems on a national level if interest rates were to go up to 5%. Is it likely? I say it's very unlikely. If base interest rates go to 5% in euro area, many euro area governments will go bankrupt. So I don't think that ECB will be able and will have a need to increase interest rates that much. So that's one thing. I think most of our manufacturing companies are still very competitive. So even if we have, it is likely that we will, maybe not likely, but it is possible that we will have a large global shock to demand. But the consequences on Baltic countries would be much smaller than they were in 2009. So that's what I think. But of course, we may have a different kind of shock. I don't want to elaborate on that, but I think Ukraine did not expect what it got this year. So, but
Yes.
we talk about, if we talk about conventional economic crises, about conventional shocks from financial sectors, then from financial markets, then we are quite well positioned to weather these kind of shocks.
Okay, before we jump into panel discussion, maybe final question from my side. Do you see industry-wise winners or losers in our region? Of course, as you said, services are coming back and tourism is booming, but still.
I think one vulnerable sector is the one that is largely reliant on labor, both cheap and skilled labor, and because this is the structural problem that we have now, and this is not related to geopolitical shock. This is something that is an ongoing, slow-burning, and ever more painful issue that we have. So we will have to address that. And interestingly, if you look for the silver linings, then the Ukrainians that were running away from war and came to Baltic countries, that they actually have solved some of the labor shortage problems that we had in some of the sectors. So yes, services, travel industry, tourism, accommodation, catering, they seem to be having a good year. I think one winner is energy sector, where of course we are going to see large transformations, but renewable energy infrastructure, this is something where we will see a lot of investments, public investments, private investments from EU funds. So this is again, if you're looking for silver lining, the greener, more sustainable energy, independent energy infrastructure will be created much faster than it would have been if the war did not happen in Ukraine.
Okay, thank you very much, Nerijus, for this incredibly deep insight in our economies. And please stay with us, but now we directly jump into the panel discussion. And I'm happy to invite three gentlemen. First, Piotr Nochin, the co-founder and managing partner at Resource Partners. This is in Warsaw-based private equity fund. Then we have also Aivaras Abramovičius, the chairman of the board at Agro Region. This is Ukraine, big company, and Presesnams project in Latvia, and the former Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine. And finally, but not lastly, Martin Gauss, CEO at Air Baltic, the leading airline in the Baltic countries. Gentlemen, welcome. Good to see you here in our discussion. And maybe we can start by you, Piotr, summarizing briefly in a couple sentences what exactly is the link between the Baltics and your business, and how you see latest developments.
Yes, thank you. I'm a co-founder and managing partner in Resource Partners, and we are a Central European-based private equity group investing primarily in the consumer sector across the countries. And my link with the Baltics is behind me. I'm just sitting today in the office in Vilnius of one of our portfolio companies, which is DIPE, which is the global leader in castable sonar market for anglers. This is the direct link by investment, but we are also actively looking into new business opportunities in the consumer space in the region, including the Baltic states.
Thank you, Piotr. And Ivars, you have active business on both sides of the border of the NATO. How do you see current challenges from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'm Lithuanian, became the first non-Estonian employee of Hansa Bank in Estonia back in 1996 before we acquired Deutsche Lettische Bank in Latvia. And then many years down the road, accidentally became Ukrainian, accidentally became 25th Minister of Economy of Ukraine, and later accidentally met Zelensky, and accidentally started to run Ukraine's defense company, Ukroboronprom, for 1.5 years with 58,000 employees. And then I quit in autumn 2020 and promised my wife to stay out of political appointments for at least 10 years. And now basically focusing on my farming operations in Ukraine, which myself with Swedish partners acquired 15 years ago, and my wife has been running for 12 years. And given these new logistical problems with grains, this is all I do at the moment. I did 2,500 kilometers from Varna in Bulgaria 5 days ago to Klaipeda now, where I'm speaking from, because the logistical problems for farmers is a nightmare. And we have 41,000 hectares of land and 260,000 tons of grain to ship. So I drove through many countries, and I could compare both what I see in terms of logistics, in terms of business attitudes, and compared to my previous experiences in the Baltics. In Riga, since 4 years ago, when we acquired a plot in central Riga, we are building 125,000 square meters of A-class office in the Persisnams area. So I think several things are happening. First and foremost, if you have been dealing with Russia or Belarus before, then it's game over. There is not going to be a quick fix in terms of sanctions being lifted. So any type of ties, shareholders, business partners with those people, I mean, this is a dead end. You need to resolve that somehow ASAP. There is not going to be a quick solution to that problem. Second, obviously, we see that because of the war, because of the sanctions, anything that relates to energy efficiency is going to be of prime interest to any investors. We at the farm, we invest into basically, we need to dry corn, a lot of corn every year, and we use a lot of gas. So we buy additional sort of equipment that allows to replace gas with sunflower pellets. And the payback period for this investment is less than 1 year. So anything that relates to energy efficiency, including moving into new offices to decrease your electricity bills, is going to work. And third, what I see as a result of war and inflation and global stock market and bond market collapse is that we are living in new realities, and it's in our own interest to be cautious in terms of expectations going forward. I see a lot of people actually returning to the offices. As Elon Musk said, everyone has to go back to the workplaces, and I see that this hybrid workplace that does not work in new challenging environment. People are used to get their daily routine things done from wherever they are, from the beach or from home, by walking in the park or cycling. But once you need to deal with new realities, with new challenges, with supply chain disruptions, I think you need to get back as a team to the office and work from this. So these are just a few sort of entry statements that I wanted to make.
Thank you, Ivars. If you may try to look at your sound part from you, a small echo comes. But Martin, on the one hand, after pandemic shock, tourism industry is back, as Nerijus showed us in slides. But on the other hand, energy prices are totally different after those years. Have you seen this new geopolitical environment and new dynamics for the business?
So we have, after these 2 years of the heaviest crisis in our industry, we saw a strong upturn in bookings coming in. And then we were really hit again, and especially here in the Baltics, with the drop in bookings caused by the war. That impact is still here. Finland and the Baltic states have that, so we feel this more than other European carriers. On top of it now, we have a record high fuel price, and we have the issues which were shown earlier with labor shortage, which means to recruit people. Despite all these negative factors, we see the opposite of what our industry expected. All airlines in Europe see a massive trend in bookings, forward bookings, the same in Air Baltic. Despite the fact of the low labor, we have grown to a size which we never had before. Now Air Baltic is larger today than it ever was before, from the employee side, but also from the productivity. But due to the last 2 years, 1/3 of our aircraft today, and we have 36 of these Airbuses behind me now, so also larger than ever in the production. But 1/3 of that fleet is flying for the Lufthansa Group and SAS, because we cannot, due to the inbound shortage of tourism, so to the Baltics there is a shortage in tourism, we cannot utilize our fleet in the Baltics so much. But we forecast now for the next summer that big part of that fleet, which is currently flying for others, is also returning to the Baltics to have the offer from here. So very positive if we look at transporting passengers. So we have come out of the crisis, but with a new cost scenario on labor, but mainly at the moment on the fuel costs. So everything has changed, but we are positive on the outlook, and we continue investing and taking on more aircraft, because our industry will go forward, as also the profile of the travelers has completely changed. We are still missing the old business travelers. They are still missing from the big corporations, but they have completely been replaced by individual traffic. And with that, destinations have changed a little bit, much more leisure flying than flying to the major hubs.
Thank you, Martin, for first comment. Maybe we could go right now in the risk assessment of our region. There always were comparisons between Baltics and other Eastern European countries. Maybe Piotr, you could elaborate on this a bit more. Have you seen differences, and do you see the right time for investment or not yet?
Yes, it's a tricky question, because you asked about the differences between Baltics and other parts of Central Europe. While I see a lot of differences among the three countries themselves. So it's natural that certain markets differ from each other. But I think in general, there are a few things that come to mind as a top ideas of where we should see the differences. And first of all is a size. So the biggest difference between Baltic countries and like my home country, Poland, for example, is the size. It's, you know, the size of the domestic economy is several times lower. So by definition, any business active in the Baltic states has to think how to scale up, how to become at least regional, if not global company. And I love the business culture in these countries. I love the pragmatism of managers and also the entrepreneurial spirit. I think this is something that stands out completely from other markets. If you I know you hate it as locals, but you hate it. But if you put the three countries into a single basket, we have the market of the size of countries like, for example, you know, Slovakia or Hungary at most, and you will see much higher business activity here than in the two countries that I mentioned. So this is the first point. I think it's very hard to say whether this business culture, pragmatism, entrepreneurial spirit comes from the fact of the sites themselves or sort of cultural difference, but these are the two biggest differences. That comes also, on the investment side, there is always a challenge in exiting from the Baltic state-based businesses because it's about the scale, but also if we as a financial investor, we always tend to sell our stake entirely at the end of our investment cycle. And it's much more challenging to find trade buyers, strategic investors, international strategic investors interested in investing in the Baltic states than, for example, in Poland. So this is all on the risk side. I think from the investor perspective, this should be also taken into the consideration. And in terms of the skill set availability, I think you've done an enormous job over the last 20, 30 years, and you have very highly skilled and innovative labor, including managers that are quite well experienced. So I think you should think of the differences both in terms of the risk, but also on the growth potential, and I think on balance the outlook is positive, and that is why I'm sitting here in Vilnius today.
Thank you, Piotr. Ivers, how about you? You are sitting in different markets, and maybe from your shoes, have you seen the key reasons why to invest in Baltics?
Well, first of all, I mean, there was already, I think, Jim mentioning about all the successes in the IT sector and technology in the Baltics. So Baltics are very quick to adapt to new realities. We already see Baltics benefiting somewhat from the flight of high-quality labor from Belarus and Russia. That needs to be obviously filtrated by the special sort of agencies. We already have 5,000 highly paid IT specialists in Vilnius from Belarus, and there has been a request of 1,000 employees from Russia to move to Riga. From what I hear. So I think that Baltics need to do more also on the political side to continue to attract quality companies to the region, which especially Invest Lithuania has done very successfully. So Latvians need just to copycat that success. Global, business shared service centers and so on, because Riga still is very small in terms of attracting those jobs as a percentage of capital compared to Krakow and Warsaw and even Vilnius. But I see that during this war crisis, inflation and so on, there is going to be a lot more reliance on domestic market in terms of supply chains. So you will not look, to deliver this high fuel costs something from faraway countries. So I believe we will have much more vertical integration across many business areas. When it comes to investment in the Baltics, from private equity funds, from venture capital funds, from other investors, I think this is the time when we will perhaps not see many new investors. So it's going to be more from usual suspects, from the Nordics, perhaps from Poland. I actually wish there was more integration between Poland and the Baltic states, and hopefully that is coming, because I see how much Poland is booming, how much road construction is going on. So I think we will need to seek our governments in the Baltics to increase more in infrastructure, finish this bloody Rail Baltic railway, which was seen massive delays, build new highways connecting Poland and Lithuania and then through the Baltics, and in that way increase flow of capital, flow of trade and so on. Thank you.
Martin, you already mentioned that actually higher labor costs and shortage of labor is challenge also for your business. Inflation also makes a pressure. We also in Delfin Group right now try to understand salary increasing, how much in the budget to expect. Have you seen this challenge of inflation and labor? It's something which you should take into account as the tactical challenge, or it will be long term?
I think we will see long term the challenge, because our issue is that we have to pay enough to recruit, because we need to keep recruiting mainly flight cabin crew and technicians, and then we need to pay enough that they stay. And one of the issues is you cannot increase it fast enough for people not to leave to a competitor. And we are in a very competitive environment. We are competing with all European carriers if we talk about our crews and technicians. So we will see in the years to come, due to inflation, the salaries rising. But we have a bigger issue in Air Baltic, or we as an industry, the supply chain issues which we have. For example, in our case, at the moment, 6 of our aircraft are on the ground due to missing parts. And these parts come from all over the world. And for us, we have 36 aircraft, 6 of them are waiting for spare parts. And so that is an issue. Even if we would have all the money on earth, the parts are not produced. And that is something going forward, also a challenge for us in our industry. And they cannot be sourced in the Baltics. These parts are coming, as I said, from all over the world. So we are planning with this, of course, going forward. But at the same time, we are also investing. We are building we build the largest hangar in the Baltics to do the maintenance for our aircraft here in the future. We are taking more aircraft in, so heavy investment. One aircraft alone is $90 million list price, and we're taking on another 16 aircraft now in the next 2 years. So a lot of investment, a lot of recruiting going on. And in our business plan, of course, we didn't plan in a 10% inflation. We worked with lower inflations, and we need to adjust this now as inflation continues to go up.
It seems to me that 3D printing in aviation has a chance. But if we are talking about your role, Martin, other colleagues are investors, but you are sitting on the other side of table. You are looking for investment. Could you maybe a bit more elaborate on this? Have you feel right now, after current geopolitical changes, from this perspective?
Of course, we are impacted now. We want to turn to the private markets, but the bond market is at the moment closed for us. So that is an issue going forward, because our future growth needs to be financed. We are preparing for an IPO once we are back in positive territory, at the moment expected in 2024. And for that, we will be listing at the local Nasdaq, and because of the capital markets not being large enough here yet in the Baltics, we'll do it in parallel somewhere else. And for that, of course, we are looking for investment from all over the world. Yes, we need to do everything to be an attractive asset. As it looks today, this will be the largest IPO in the Baltics when we do it, just from the size of what we need to raise to be able to repay the money injected by the shareholder according to the EU rules. So difficult situation right now as bond markets are closed, and we need to finance ourselves to go towards the IPO. And then the IPO itself, today you would not want to do it. So we are looking for better investment climate, but not only here. I think at the moment in our industry, it's a bit more difficult. But looking at what is coming, looking at green investments, which I think here Air Baltic is leading in the world. We have the youngest fleet in Europe. We have the most efficient, most sustainable fleet going forward. So that's a very good base as an airline, and we have all the targets to become net zero as an industry by 2050, and we are definitely prepared for that. But it's a difficult ride, and the investors at the moment are not too keen to invest in airlines. They need to see the airlines in general getting out of that still COVID crisis, but it looks like we will get out of it now.
Thank you, Martin. Maybe we could also elaborate a little bit more from investor shoes. Inflation and shortage of labor also is some aspects which investors are looking for into the markets. Piotr, do you see that those changes in environment somehow are linked with current geopolitical situation closely, or you see this broader perspective and you can take this into account for any decision when you are going to make new investments?
Yeah, I'll start with the anecdote. So few weeks ago, I have received equity research from my colleague, which was dated November 2019, and it was the equity research on a company that was after a few years of heavy restructuring and had the silver lining on the horizon. But the analyst ended the investment thesis with the statement that was similar to what I will try to quote from my memory, that from now on, this company will have very positive developments unless we have a global pandemic or the war starts. And it was November 2019. So the obviously, you know, I think legally the caveat of the analyst was 100% correct. So but you know, even in November 2019, nobody expected that we will have such dynamic 3 years ahead. And what I have learned over the years in the private equity business, I'm more than 20 years now working as an investor, is that basically this is very long-term investment. So you will never invest in the bottom, and you will never sell at the when the markets are up. You will have the mix of that. So our approach is that we do business as usual. So obviously we are trying to analyze the risks. It's not that if we spot the risk factors, we don't do investment. We just try to well understand, you know, what are the mitigants and how we should address the risk factors. And of course, Russian aggression into the free world and supply chain shortages are very significant elements of all this risk analysis. However, you know, history tells us that the best business opportunities came out when the markets were unstable, and especially when there was a wartime. You know, Rothschild's wealth would not be created without the Napoleon Wars. So we see this as more as an opportunity rather than the threat to our business. And I think the situation is very different across the different sectors. Of course, you know, what's the challenges for the airline industry is different than for the food industry today. But in general, I think we should take the lesson, especially in this region, we should take the lesson from the crisis of 2007, 2008, and what happened in 2009 and after here. So I see this as a big opportunity for the region. I expect increased focus of big international corporations on shoring of the production, just to address the supply chain distortions. They will be looking for cost efficiencies, and I do believe that in general the businesses in Central Europe are quite competitive on the cost side, but not necessarily because of the low labor costs. I think these times are over, as Mr. Gauss said a few minutes ago. But in general, we have much more. On average, we have much more modern organizations, much more modern companies in terms of technology, in terms of innovation. And we used to be investors in, for example, in food processing businesses, but were beneficiaries of Dutch and French companies not coping with the cost structures with Central European companies, and we were winning market shares in Western Europe from them. So this is doable. This has happened. I think innovation and technology and entrepreneurial spirit of our region will help to face these challenges.
Thank you, Piotr. Maybe also one more question regarding your topic what you already covered some time ago. You said that actually liquidity in the market is enough and private equity funds have resources to invest. But on the other hand, risk of further exits, risk of interest from the bigger markets, from global VCs is not so, we would say, intense. Then the question is, do you see that there is opportunity to overcome this challenge, or there is some other aspects that we should take into account when entrepreneurs are looking for investment?
Yeah. So I think I was misunderstood. So I was talking about when you asked me earlier about the differences between the Baltics and the rest of Central Europe. What are the differences? This is what I meant. That the Baltic states, given the size, are not sort of number one candidate on the radar screen of international trade buyers, and this will not change. You will not become 10 times larger countries in 2-3 years. This is not possible. But the only solution to that is to build bigger companies, build more international companies, finding the space on the global markets where you can become the dominant player or important player at least. And companies in our historical portfolio took this lesson and were trying to expand internationally. We're very successful in expanding into Western Europe, into Scandinavia, and therefore most of our exits were to international trade buyers who were market leaders, at least in Europe. And this is the only solution to address this risk factor.
Thank you, Piotr. We have a question from Mr. Turnbull, and then maybe Ivers, you could reflect on that. What you think about fintech-based private equity funds looking to outscore IT development-related work to developers in Ukraine? A lot of highly qualified IT people can't leave but need income. It sounds valuable from a humanitarian standpoint, but are there logistics issues or anything else you could elaborate on this, Ivers?
Yes, thank you very much. We all know about 11 unicorns out of Estonia and a couple here and there from Latvia and Lithuania. And we don't talk much about Ukrainian IT ecosystem. And even though Ukraine does not have so many unicorns, especially on a per capita basis, the amount of people with highly paid jobs and working in the sector is just enormous. It's hundreds of thousands of people. Most of them, if not all, work under a special tax treatment of 5%, while the rest of the people pay much 4 or 5 times higher taxes. It means that they are set up as individual entrepreneurs. And as an individual entrepreneur, you have no right to be blocked or reserved from mobilization. So basically, those people cannot leave the country. They are stuck unless they left before to Silicon Valley and so on. But all of them have jobs. All of them have jobs. Recent pay survey shows that actually their salaries are going up. And they are one of those people that keep economy going by spending domestically. So Ukrainian IT system is extremely well developed. Most of them working for global markets. They have been catering for the US and for Western European markets through outsource and other situations for ages. And they're no longer that cheap. So I just read recently an article that Girteka, the largest logistics company in Europe for truck transportation from Lithuania with 9,000 trucks and the largest investor actually in Presisnam's project. They're already looking for IT solutions to solve for them in Georgia, among other countries where labor is a bit cheaper. So here, Baltics obviously, but also very much Ukraine at times is already pricing itself out of the markets because the IT guys are very expensive in Ukraine to a large extent. But overall, just to say also a couple of words about capital markets and so on, I completely agree with Martin that IPO market is largely shut right now. A week ago, I met a former colleague in Stockholm who works now for Pareto Securities. He said last year they had a deal every single day. So imagine how crazy it is. I remember in 1997 when I was a 21-year-old stockbroker in Estonia, and every car dealership in Estonia was doing an IPO. And we know how it ended in tears. So Pareto made $190 million net profit last year in Norway and Sweden on those deals. A deal a day, and this is irrational exuberance, as Alan Greenspan said once upon a time, and that, of course, is not very sustainable. But I see, obviously, at least 4 areas of interest to invest, and people still will be looking for yields because, as Nerijus just showed, 35 billion euros in deposits in the Baltic banks without a home, basically, without a yield. So we at Presisnams in the last 2 months raised about 80 million euros in bonds, in additional financing for the project at 6.5%, and investors found it very attractive. But overall, I see again more investment into energy efficiency. It's unlimited. You can invest as much as you want there. Food security. Right now in Kiev, there is no vegetables and greens because everything was supplied from Kherson. Which is occupied right now, which is basically the motherland of all vegetables, the best tomatoes in the world, the best peaches in the world, and that's not a joke, Ben. That's for sure. I tasted myself many times. So a lot of it in terms of food is going to be more domestic. Third area of interest to invest is obviously going to be military and dual sort of used goods. As we see now, Lithuanians are buying, Turkish drones, and Lithuanians are buying Lithuanian anti-drone jamming systems, and all of those things will be of big interest, especially for venture capital investments and beyond. And then selective real estate. There is a shortage of certain real estate. In Riga, there is a shortage of office. That's why we're building. In Vilnius, there is a shortage of residential. Only 400 units of apartments is available for rent in Vilnius. And this is why, some Belarusians or Russians with decent credentials want to choose Vilnius as their new home. Many companies simply cannot find apartments to rent or even to buy for their employees. So the stock of residential in Vilnius, but I think also in Riga, is a bit shallow to attract more investment. And for that sake, I recently spoke to the mayor of Vilnius. Normally, Vilnius was growing 1% a year in terms of population. This year, it's going to grow 4%. So obviously, some imbalances are there on the real estate market. Thank you.
Thank you, Aivaras. That was very clear and bold assessment of potential. Piotr, would you like to add anything to that?
Well, I think with the economy, especially in the turbulent times, is that if you think negatively, then it's self-fulfilling prophecy. And if we stay positive, it will be easier to have positive outcome in any business going forward. One thing, because I would like also to touch the point on the presentation from Swedbank we had just before this panel, is I think there is one one factor that was not taken into this analysis. But for many sectors, particularly on the consumer side, we over the last 2 years we faced something what I call as an accelerated demand. So many consumer companies were selling more than normally they would sell because people were sitting at homes and were making their decisions differently than earlier. And the slowdown that we see today is not only related to the geopolitical situation and turbulence we face east from our region, but also where people who would buy certain products or services today have done it already over the last 2 years. And what is very important to consider, especially when we talk about the consumer businesses, is how these businesses are doing compared with their performance before COVID pandemic started. And in our portfolio, we have no single company in the consumer sector that is performing worse today than it performed back in 2019. And I think this is very positive. And we tend to compare the performance to sort of most recent data, but remember that they were inflated not by pricing, but by the demand just 2 and 1 year ago. And I think I tend to be very optimistic about it. But of course the turbulence is there, and you need, as an entrepreneur, as an investor, you need to really understand what are the risks and how you want to mitigate them.
Thank you, Piotr. Any final remarks from you, Martin, regarding nearest future?
Yes, I can say that a lot of the flights are sold out, not only for us, also for major European carriers for the next months. So we see record high load factors in the next 2 months to go, but we do not see what is coming in the winter. So we are very positive right now. We will be positive tomorrow, but we need to see what the development does. Is that now something, as we heard earlier from Swedbank, that people after COVID booking a trip and that's it? Or is there more money people will spend to travel? We can give a better outlook on this when we go into autumn, when we then see the forward bookings for the winter. Right now, it looks very, very good, and we could do with some more aircraft right now to satisfy the demand.
Thank you, Martin. It was a great pleasure having you all here in our discussion. Thank you, gentlemen, for your contribution. To summarize all what we have heard today, I guess there are many positive news, but on the other hand, it's clear that we should be much more agile as we used to be, and we should be ready for risk assessment in every moment, not only in each quarter of the year. And that's like new approach how we should look forward and assess our opportunities. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be a part of today's webinar. Carly, I would like to thank you for this great event, and some couple final closing remarks from your side. Over to you, Carly.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you to the people who participated in today's event. As Lena said, from Nasdaq, so we are doing this kind of events more than 15 years, trying to make easier world for entrepreneurs, companies to understand better how the capital markets, how the company valuation, how the investment decisions are done. I'd like to thank you, Ben, Jim, Nerijus, Martin, Ivras, Piotr for joining. I know them, many of them personally. I hope this was good time for them as well. So yeah, so we touched today a lot what is now, but of course I think we have just to remind for ourselves and for international audience which is listening and watching us now that the Baltic countries they have lived with Russians last 1,000 years together, and we know each other quite well, and we have warned and we have prepared ourselves for this kind of situation that we of course are not happy to see for a long time. So we, as some powerful politicians from Germany said, Baltics they are not Russophobic, but they are the best antenna that we have in Europe. They, as Ben said, we understand Russians quite well, so we have to find this balance between being neighbors, and we will be neighbors for 1,000 years. We were neighbors for 1,000 years. We will continue to be neighbors, but how to live with this kind of neighbor, this is really challenging, and we know how to do that. And I just want a little bit to pay your attention that there is still some maybe stereotype that there is big influence of Russian money on investments here in the Baltics. It's not true. So gradually, I guess starting from 20 years when Putin came to power, with all crises that we have seen, with entering, of course, NATO, European Community, with Georgian war, with Ukraine war, Crimea occupation, Latvia and Lithuania and Estonia have reduced gradually, but persistently the Russian influence here. So after banking supervision, let's say, changes, I guess the Russian money existence in the banking system in Baltics is close to zero. So in GDP and FDI that we have, I looked at the numbers, like Russian money is like less than 2%. So it's so we are happy to be good neighbors, but we are very cautious, and I don't see any big risks from like changes that are happening now, like isolation of Russia. I hope will not harm Baltic countries. I think this harm will be much less than for other European countries. So because Baltic countries, they were prepared for that. Yes, many people today, they talked about investments and energy. And of course, if you look to the investments which are coming now and they were done last year, so I counted that in wind energy alone, investors from Australia, like First Center investors, from Sweden, Eolia, from Czech Republic, BMH Group, so Latvenergo, altogether there is 2,000 megawatt planned investments in wind energy in Latvia alone. So it's around 6 billion, plus minus 6 billion euros that will come to country to have this green energy. And as Ivara said, there is like no limits for that. This will continue. This is good sign how we change our energy balance and how we reduce dependency from Russia. And of course, there is a lot of fintech and tech startups in Estonia, which is leading. There is around 1,400 startups, and there is a growth of money flowing in, like a 19% for first quarter of this year. So investments are coming in, startups are doing their job well. So that will for sure continue. And maybe in final remarks, I would like to say I like maybe sometimes quote some famous people. I like Churchill, and I think the best words that currently I can repeat to myself and to you, that success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that counts. So I wish all of you to continue what we do, and of course, as every speech we have to complete with the words Slava Ukraini. Thank you. Paldies.